Welcome to Dove and Dragon Radio. I'm your host, M.L.Ruscsak. I'm here with wonderful guest, Jan Notzon. Welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. It is great to be here.
Now, you have the book out, Song for the Forsaken, and this is available on Amazon, and I'm going to guess also Barnes & Nobles?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And several other places.
Mm-hmm.
So what led you to write this one?
Oh, boy. That's quite a story. I was an actor in a former life, and when I got to where I couldn't stand life in New York City, I took an opportunity to study for my Master of Fine Arts at the University of South Carolina. And I had written little scenes before, but this young freshman gal came to me and said she wanted me to write what she called a psychodrama for her and one of my fellow MFA candidates. And she was, at the time, she was a born-again Christian, and I was a rabid atheist. And so I wrote this book exploring this, this one-act play, it started out as, about two sisters, two dirt-poor fundamentalist sisters in Appalachia. Mm-hmm. The elder, Mandy, having raised the younger one, Sorrel. And the play asks the question about whether a bond can survive. The elder one, Mandy's... Sure.
Oh. I'm sorry.
No problem. I love dogs. I have one myself.
Well, occasionally I bring my dog, because she's a service dog, into the studio.
Uh-huh.
And I tell everyone, I'm recording, be quiet, so they don't disturb the dog.
Oh, right.
Well, yeah. Well, what do they do? Oh, the recording light's on. That means disturb the show host, right? Of course.
Oh, man.
So back to your wonderful story.
Oh, and it asks the question about whether that bond, that really fierce bond between the two sisters can survive Mandy's complete loss of faith.
Well, I think it's not just sisters at that point. It's anyone can draw that parallel. It's
absolutely.
Good friends, yeah, mother, daughter, anyone can draw the parallel. Can you keep the bond that you have with someone when they lose faith completely?
Yeah, and it in my opinion, actually pertains to people who have different ideologies. When
of course,
they're really fierce believers in a certain ideology, and one of them starts to change. It can happen there too.
Exactly. I see this with my own. Not so much now, but when I was younger, I have a different religion than the rest of my family.
Uh-huh.
So, of course, I'm the outcast.
Oh, boy.
It's taken almost 16 years for them to come back around.
Oh, really? Wow. Yeah. Boy, that's a prime example right there.
Yes, it is.
And the story includes all of the family history over 3 generations that leads up to the crisis. Things don't happen in isolation.
Right.
They happen over time.
Mm-hmm.
And so the story basically explores the positive and potentially negative sides of faith, how it can bind us and how it can pull us apart.
Correct. I mean, we look at things, faith needs to be a inner battle. It doesn't need to be an external everyone's business. This is my ideology.
I absolutely agree.
It's not something for discussion. It's a personal choice. It's not a community choice.
Right. That's more the spiritual than the actual religious, but
yeah.
But absolutely, you have to have free will, and you have to exercise your free will that, in my opinion, is God-given, to make up your own mind.
Correct. Okay. So in my family, we have basically every Christianic faith in one family.
Oh, boy.
So you can imagine some of those arguments over religion. I'm like, but, okay, let's take away the name, and let's look at the principles. They're all almost the same. So aren't we all pretty much the same thing then?
Yeah.
But I'm different from all of them, and they're like, I'm the outcast. I'm like, wait, what?
Well, I'm curious as to how that would happen, since, you know, you said they're all of different denominations. Why are you the outcast?
Because I'm more of a spiritualist than a uniform religion.
Okay. That makes sense.
So, yeah, I don't fit in a normal, I'm an author, I'm a creator, I'm a creative mind. I don't fit in a little box.
Right.
So you talk to authors all the time. Our minds don't fit in normal linear thought. So,
yeah, I can understand what you're saying for sure. Yeah.
So I look at everything like, okay, we're people. Let's label it at that.
Yep. Yeah. We'd have a lot less violence in the world if people thought that way.
Exactly. Let's stop looking at the religious name. Let's stop that. Just look at the person and their values. There you go. There's my religion.
Exactly.
But you have it in a way that is not so much true religion, but a story that compels people to think.
Well, I would like to think so, for sure. And I think it does. The two sisters' maternal grandfather, is the deeply fundamentalist. And I read a book called The Fundamentalist Mindset, and how that tends to produce people who are not tolerant of other conclusions, other beliefs, other faiths. And, you know, that's how Mandy was raised at first. She had, there is also another character, important character, an African-American lady who was Mandy's wet nurse, and basically her surrogate mother, because her mother was raised by her grandfather, and she is basically lost in her religion. She can't function in the real world, so she couldn't really raise her children, couldn't really love her children that way. And her name is Aunt Loney, and Aunt Loney disappears at one point when Mandy's quite young. And when Mandy goes away, the beginning of the story, Mandy is coming back from hospice, where she stayed with her mother during her mother's last few months of life. And it is that experience, seeing her mother lose her own faith, and seeing, you know, there's a lot of question about faith in the face of innocent people suffering. How do you reconcile that with an all-benevolent God?
Right.
And Mandy, because she was so fundamentalist on one side, when she begins to doubt, she has to reject it completely. She has to reject all faith, all belief in God. And so that sets up the conflict when she gets back to her sister.
I can see how that would work, though. We all have internal struggles because
Yes.
we see stuff on TV. We're influenced a lot by media, radio, anything. Churches, we all get different influences and all mixed together. So we see all the horrible stuff going on around us or in other countries, and we're like, we have that internal thing. If there is an all-powerful God, why is this happening? But that at the same time, there's so many different teachings out there that explain some of this away or put it under the rug.
Right.
So we have so many different things in our culture to tie into your book.
Yeah. Well, that's what I hope. Basically, my primary objective is to tell a good story.
Yes.
Story interesting that people can identify with, characters they can identify with, and problems that the characters have.
Exactly.
That they can identify with those. It's so much gravy if it stimulates them to think about these issues in their own lives.
Right.
But, my primary interest is entertaining.
Of course. I mean, as an author, that is always our primary goal, is to entertain our audience.
Right.
The second goal is to make the audience think.
Right. There you go. That's it in a nutshell.
Exactly. I mean, that transfers between TV, movies, books, radio. The primary goal is always to entertain.
Right. And Melissa, what kind of things do you write?
I am a fantasy author. I do a little bit of poetry, a little bit of songwriting again. I have a few short stories coming out that are really make you think, but they're not fantasy, but they're just general fiction. So I'm all over the place as a writer.
Well, that's what I write, is general fiction. I can't pigeonhole it any more than that.
Yeah, I mean,
I just want to tell a good story.
Exactly. I mean, we have so many things out there as authors that some things go toward one genre and others just don't fit in a genre, so we call it general fiction.
Yeah, there. Exactly right.
Now, you have actually 4 books out.
I do.
You do, see? I do my research.
Good for you.
So we have The Dog's Barking, which is, I think, these are all general fiction.
They are all general fiction, yeah.
Yeah, The ID Paradox and Ye Shall Be as God. So just so our listeners know what other books they can look for.
Yeah, it's actually the id paradox. I could kick myself for not having that part of the title in uppercase, lowercase lettering, but, and I lost the name of the artist who did it, so I can't change it, but it is the id paradox.
Really?
And The Dog's Barking is a coming-of-age story, or what, literary people call the Bildungsroman, the development of a character. And I actually had one critic mention that it was a legitimate Bildungsroman, which I guess must be a German term. But it's just basically a coming-of-age story about a child growing up in difficult circumstances in the 1950s and then being thrown into the wild-eyed 60s in college. And, how he tries to make up for his estranged family. And interestingly enough, he finds the last piece of the puzzle in his... The dog's barking refers to the protagonist when he was a child. He grew up in a house with no air conditioning, so he could hear the dogs in the distance barking. One would bark, and then the other would answer, and then another one farther away would answer. And he has a certain sympathy because he feels their loneliness. They're trying to communicate with each other because they're outside, the family is inside, and they're lonely. And he is lonely, and finally finds the last piece of the puzzle that puts his character together back in that sleepy little town on the Mexican border where he grew up, and the sound of those dogs barking in the distance.
Okay.
So that's what that one's about. And Ye Shall Be as Gods is, boy, that's a complex one. It has a lot of metaphor but it's basically about a young man whose adopted little sister is terrified of the world around. She's agoraphobic and she is also a violin prodigy.
Okay.
But she has cut herself off from the world. She just stays in her home with her mother. And he is trying to figure out what caused her to retreat into her madness this way. And in the process, he experiences all kinds of evil. And he is in a hospital with a survivor of the Holocaust, and the survivor tells him his story, and he tries to understand how on earth this could ever have happened. Again,
right.
Innocent suffering, and why.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the more horrific times of our modern history, if you go back within the last 100 years.
Right.
I mean, there's other examples that go back further, but that's
slavery.
One of our... Yeah. It's just horrific.
Yeah. And, he finally finds the answer again when he's back home. And the answer is absolutely horrifying. So I can't say any more than that.
Yeah. We don't want to give away the story. We want we want the readers to be intrigued enough to go buy the story.
Exactly.
So that's always our goal.
Yeah, right. The Id Paradox is about three friends, Jake, Artie, and Connors, but it focuses on the relationship between Jake and Artie. Artie is, his last name is Cavazos. He's was Mexican and came across the border with his family before there was all this hoopla about it.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a special bond with Jake. Jake is a young man who is full of self-doubt, and I think Artie kind of adopts him because Artie is, again, that the reason for his feeling for Jake is revealed later in the story, and I don't want to give that away either.
Right.
But it's basically about when they're on a canoe trip after they graduate from high school. They're on a canoe trip through the Big Bend National Park, the Rio Grande River, and they lose everything in rapids. And, they get more and more desperate because, there's no one else out there in June. Nobody is stupid enough, except for these three young boys, to go out in the middle of the desert in June. It's 110 degrees. There's no moisture anywhere. You can't drink the water in the Rio Grande. It's poison.
Right.
So as that desperation builds and builds, it comes to an explosive point, and Jake finds in himself the feeling of the ability to kill, and it just he can't accommodate it. And the rest of the story is in part about Jake's coming to terms with that part of that primitive part of himself. You can call it the id, the old brain, the reptilian part of our brains, the fight, flight, or freeze part of us that just lashes out, as opposed to the cognitive that, evaluates. And it asks the question, is that part of us necessary? Is it an indispensable part of us?
That is true.
Because, it is the origin of a lot of the violence in the world. That part that wants to lash out. And not just physical violence, but verbal violence that causes a great deal of harm in and of itself.
Very true. And we have so much violence in the world right now, not just physical. It's so much more verbal now.
Yes, it is. Certainly in this country it is.
Yeah, this country is very verbal. Other countries very physical. But we have violence starting out as children against other children. It's getting to the point we need to rethink what's going on.
Right.
In your book, I think this one specifically will make people think about that.
I do hope so.
I mean, anything that makes us think and re-question morals and what we're teaching our young is a good thing.
Yeah. The second part of what happens to Artie is 10 times worse than what happens. Artie, in his effort to bring his uncle across the border, his uncle has been forced to work for a drug cartel, and the drug cartel finds out about the plan, and Artie is taken captive by them and tortured and winds up in a horrible, horrible Mexican prison. And part of the plot is Jake and Connor's plot to rescue him from those horrible conditions in that jail.
Yeah, rescue missions, jails, yeah. That's the making of a wonderful story to be told and to entertain.
Well, thank you. And the second part is actually Artie's treatment for severe, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's told from the point of view of the psychiatrist who's treating him.
And that's a very unique take. And here's why. We talk about PTSD a lot more with our veterans than we do other people, but anyone can have PTSD. And we normally hear it from the family's point of view. We never hear it too much from the patient's point of view because they can't word it right, but we never hear it from the psychologist's point of view.
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to the person who wrote, Judith Lewis Herman is her name. She wrote a book about treating PTSD, and it was, I have to admit that I took a lot from her. I learned a lot and took a lot from her book.
Well, that's a wonderful thing to do. And that's the best form of flattery you can give another author, is to learn from their teachings.
Yeah, absolutely. And to use it, hopefully, to communicate with a lot of other people.
Exactly.
I'm hoping that's what will happen.
Yes, we take a book from an author that's writing nonfiction. We put it into a fictional setting to bring their teachings full circle to reach a grander audience.
Right, exactly. And so that led me to finally to take up that play, that one-act play that I wrote, that I developed into a full-length play, to novelize it, the Song for the Forsaken.
Well, see, everything comes back full circle, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So where, other than buying your books on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and other online retailers, where can our listeners find you?
Now, on my website, jannotzon.com.
Okay.
I would urge people, because I've also written 7 full-length plays, children's story, so I would like them to experience that as well.
You have a lot of things to write.
Now my dog is requesting attention from me.
See,
but she's a quiet one.
Well, normally mine is, but she had to let me know someone was here that shouldn't be here because I put my light on that says on air, be quiet, don't knock. And she's fine if everyone follows the rules.
So she had to warn you.
Yes. Like, I don't see them waving and trying to get in. I'm like, okay, seriously? But it's okay. She's doing her job, so I love her.
Incidentally, you can also get Song for the Forsaken here in Charlotte, at least, at Park Road Books, which is one of the few independent bookstores in Charlotte, and a very good one. I'm going to be back there April the 2nd, featuring my book, Song for the Forsaken. I did the Id Paradox last time, and, the others, and Ye Shall Be As Gods, and The Dog's Barking. But it was primarily the Id Paradox. So I will be back there April 2nd at 7 o'clock.
Awesome. I love it when authors tell me where we can find you at, like book signings and stuff. That's always awesome.
Great. I hope to have a good-sized audience. I think I will.
Oh, you probably will. And I wish you all the best because really, book signings are awesome. You don't just get to meet the author and get an autograph and also pick up an awesome book. You get to learn little tidbits about the story if you actually talk to the author.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I really like for people to tell me what my books are about. I find that just as interesting as writing them to see what other people think about them.
Oh, yeah, because when we get feedback, then we can make the story so much better.
Mm-hmm.
But also it can ignite our creative process and lead into another book.
Well, I'm working on another one now. Actually, it's a fictionalized version of my father's family's emigration from Poland to the United States.
Oh.
And that is, that's difficult because I don't know anything about peasant life in Poland in the 19th century. So I'm really taxing my imagination on this one.
Yeah, it's when you get that one done, let me know. That's something that interests me as a reader. So.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes.
I will definitely do that.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Melissa, thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
It has, and I welcome you back anytime in the future.
Okay. Thanks so much.
And happy reading, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.